All my life, I lived in the shadow of my brother Nathan. At every family gathering, my mom reminded me I wasn't enough. But that night, when she dismissed my work as a childish hobby, something inside me broke. Decades of silence erupted in one moment as I finally spoke the truth I had buried for years. The room went still when I claimed my own voice. My name is Elena Carter, and I was 17 years old the night everything became clear. I can still see the image as if it happened yesterday. Nathan, my brilliant older brother, was standing under the blinding lights of the auditorium stage, shaking hands with professors and politicians, while cameras exploded all around him. The announcer's voice boomed with pride as he called Nathan's name, awarding him the National Science Prize. My parents sat in the front row. Leaning so far forward they looked as though they might climb onto the stage themselves. My mother's face glowed brighter than the trophy Nathan held. I wasn't on that stage. I wasn't even close to the spotlight. I was tucked away in the corner of the auditorium, my sketchbook open across my lap, my pencil scratched nervously across the paper, as if filling a page with lines and shadows could drown out the applause echoing in my ears. I loved my brother. I really did. But in that moment, love was tangled with something darker. Each cheer that rose from the crowd seemed to hammer a single truth into my heart. From where I sat, I could see my mother's hands clapping so hard her palms must have stung. I imagined her voice later that night, telling every neighbor and relative how her son was destined for greatness. I knew the words before she even spoke them. I had heard them my whole life. Nathan, the prodigy. Nathan, the pride of the family. And me? I was the quiet one in the shadows. The girl who drew faces no one looked at, who painted dreams no one cared to hang on the wall. That night I stopped pretending it was only in my head. That night I understood no matter what I did, I would never shine in my mother's eyes. I closed my sketchbook. But the truth stayed open, raw and permanent. Written not on paper but deep inside me. The celebration didn't end on that stage. It followed us home, spilling into every corner of our house like perfume that lingered too long. In the living room, Nathan's trophy already had a place waiting for it. My mother cleared the top shelf of the cabinet and placed the gold cup right in the center, angling it so that anyone who stepped inside would see it first. She polished the glass until her reflection stared back at her, beaming with pride. I stood in the doorway, clutching the edges of a canvas I had been working on for weeks. Oil paint still smelled faintly on the surface. Layers of color pressed together into a piece of myself I thought was worth sharing. I had painted a storm breaking over a field of wildflowers. Because that was how 17 felt, wild and fragile all at once. Always on the edge of being swept away. For a moment, I let myself believe she would see me. Just once. I carried the painting forward, holding it out like a fragile offering. "Mom," I said quietly, "I made this. I wanted you to see it." It. Her eyes flicked toward it. A glance so brief, it might as well have been a shadow. Then she shook her head. "It's just colors. Elena, pretty. Maybe. But meaningless. Nathan's award. Now, that's something real. Something that proves worth. It is no speeder projected." Her words were soft, almost casual. But they struck harder than a slap. I swallowed against the lump in my throat, forcing a nod I didn't feel. She had already turned back to the trophy, adjusting its angle once more, as if the world might collapse if it wasn't perfectly displayed. I carried my painting upstairs, each step heavier than the last. My room was dim, the walls covered with sketches and canvases that no one had ever cared to look at. I leaned the stormy field against the wall, the flowers on the canvas staring back at me with the same unanswered longing I carried in my chest. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, something sharp and restless began to grow inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw paint until the walls dripped with my anger, to cover the silence of this house with color no one could ignore. I didn't have the words for it yet, but I knew the seed had been planted. The desire to prove myself not to her, maybe not even to my family, but to the world beyond these walls. I was still 17 when the anger finally spilled over. Too heavy to keep buried inside the four walls of my bedroom. My mother's words about my painting echoed every time I looked at Nathan's shining trophy. Sitting in the living room like a crown no one else in the family could ever wear, I couldn't compete with him in her world. So, I decided I would build a world of my own. That's when I found the alleys. Cracked bricks. Broken fences. In the smell of damp concrete. It was nothing like the polished glass cases where Nathan's achievements lived. And yet, when I pressed a can of spray paint in my trembling hand for the first time, I felt more alive than I ever had at home. The hiss of the nozzle sounded like freedom. The paint burst out in streaks of red and black. Bold and defiant. Staining the wall with my fury. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from something close to exhilaration. Colors layered over each other. Twisting into shapes I didn't plan but somehow recognized. Faces that screamed. Eyes that burned. Flowers blooming out of cracks in the stone. Each image was raw and imperfect. But it was mine. For the first time, the world couldn't ignore me. If they won't see me at home, I'll make sure the world will. The thought pulsed in my head like a drumbeat as I painted. The streets became my gallery. Streetlights hummed above me, casting their pale glow while I painted into the night. Strangers walked past, sometimes they paused. Sometimes they shook their heads. But they saw me. They saw what I had created. Even if it was just for a moment. I wasn't invisible. There was risk. Of course, graffiti wasn't legal. And I knew my mother would be horrified if she ever discovered it. But I didn't care. The walls didn't judge me. I didn't compare me to Nathan. I didn't measure my worth against trophies and test scores. They absorbed every ounce of my rage and gave me something back in return, proof that I existed. One night, as I stood back from a freshly painted mural, a swirl of fire and wings breaking free from chains, I felt the wind cut through the alley. Sharp and cold, but inside, I was burning. I stared at the wall. My chest heaving. My fingertips stained with red and gold. For the first time, I felt powerful. Not in the way my brother looked powerful on stage, but in a way that belonged only to me. That night I walked home with paint under my nails and the faint smell of spray lingering in my hair. I slipped through the front door quietly. The house asleep. Nathan's trophy catching the moonlight from its cabinet. I didn't look at it long. I just kept walking upstairs. My heart pounding with the knowledge that I had carved out something no one could take from me. I was no longer just Nathan's little sister. I was Elena Carter. And the city walls knew my name. It started with a flyer taped to the window of a coffee shop downtown. Community art showcase local voices. Local vision. I must have walked past it 3 times before I found the courage to rip it down and shove it into my backpack. A showcase wasn't a back alley wall. It wasn't a secret painted in the shadows. It was public. It was terrifying. For days, I debated with myself. My art had always lived on bricks and abandoned train cars. Places where rejection meant nothing, because no one ever expected to see beauty there. But this meant standing in front of people who would stare at me, judge me, and maybe laugh. Still, something in me whispered that it was time. If the walls had given me a voice, maybe this event could finally give me ears willing to listen. The night of the showcase, I carried 2 canvases I had worked on for weeks. They were raw and bold, born from the same anger that fueled my graffiti but shaped with more control. One was a storm of reds and blacks, a figure pushing against invisible chains. The other, softer, but no less defiant, showed a girl holding a flame against a sky of darkness. My hands shook as I set them on the easel, the smell of paint still clinging to them. The room buzzed with chatter, people milling around with wine glasses in hand. My heart hammered in my chest as strangers stopped to look at my work. Some tilted their heads. Others whispered to the person beside them. But they were looking. They were really looking. Then he appeared. A man in his 50s. Sharp suit. Silver hair that seemed to catch the light. And a presence that made the air shift. I recognized him instantly, Daniel Foster. A well-known designer who had built a reputation for championing unconventional voices in art. I had seen his name in magazines, always associated with words like visionary and bold. 65 70 sames concern of 70s concern of four, and if you one din never four, is of the mall saying my tan din. He stopped in front of my canvases and didn't move for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to shrink. To explain. To tell him I didn't really belong here. That I was just a kid who painted on walls when nobody was watching. But before I could open my mouth, he turned to me. You did these? His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp, as if they were peeling back layers of me I didn't even know existed. Yes, I whispered, my throat dry. He nodded slowly. There's honesty here. Not polished. Not safe. Raw. That's rare. Don't lose it. To the sapid. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. Then, as casually as if he were commenting on the weather, he said, I'd like to talk about working together. Your style, your truth, it could have a place in what I'm building. The side of mine. The side of my difference. The world tilted under my feet. My chest filled so fast I thought I might burst. Someone saw me. Not as Nathan's sister. Not as the girl who would never be enough. But as Elena Carter. An artist worth noticing. That night, I walked home with my canvases under my arm. But they felt lighter than air. For the first time, I carried hope with me. And hope was heavier. Brighter. More intoxicating than any spray can I had ever held. I don't think I had ever run home so fast in my life. The night air still carried the hum of excitement from the gallery. And my head was spinning with Daniel Foster's words. I couldn't stop replaying them raw. Rare. Don't lose it. It felt like the moment I had been waiting for all along. For once, someone important had seen me. Not as a shadow but as an artist with something real to offer. As I pushed open the front door, I imagined the scene in my head, my mother's face lighting up, her arms wrapping around me. The words, I'm proud of you, finally slipping past her lips. I wanted so badly for her to look at me the way she looked at my brother. Nathan. Every time he brought home a report card full of A's or another college acceptance letter. Maybe tonight I'd finally earn that look. She was in the kitchen. As always. Rinsing dishes with that stern concentration she gave to even the simplest chores. I set my canvases down carefully, still riding the wave of hope. Mom, I began, breathless. You won't believe what happened. There was this designer Daniel Foster, he saw my work, and he wants to talk about collaborating. He said my style was honest and rare. A teaser. For a split second, I swore I saw her pause. A flicker of something crossed her face. But it was gone before I could name it. She didn't turn toward me. Instead, she shook the water from her hands, grabbed a dish towel, and said flatly, That's nice, Elena. But things like that don't pay the bills. And it is no sing. My chest tightened. But Mom? This is real. He's famous. This could be the start of something. She cut me off with a sigh. Turning finally to face me. Her eyes were tired. Not unkind. But heavy with disappointment I had grown up memorizing. You should think more about your future. About stability. You know Nathan didn't waste his time with these distractions. He's on a real path. You'd be smart to follow him. It's a Grexid. The words hit harder than any slammed door. I felt the air leave my lungs. My mother had reduced the most incredible moment of my life to nothing more than a childish hobby. The warmth of the gallery, the applause in my ears, Daniel Foster's nod of approval, all of it evaporated under the chill of her disapproval. I wanted to scream. To tell her that I wasn't Nathan. That I would never be Nathan. And that maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to be. But the words tangled in my throat. Burning. Instead, I stood there gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. Swallowing the storm raging inside me, in my head. Though, The screams echoed loud and clear. Why am I never enough for you? Why can't you see me? When I finally carried my canvases up to my room, they felt heavier than they had at the start of the night. Heavier with hope crushed into dust. I closed the door quietly. But inside, my chest roared with fury. What should have been the happiest night of my life ended with the bitter truth carved deeper than ever. I could shine as bright as fire. And still, it would never be enough to warm my mother. That night I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word my mother had said. The joy I carried home from the gallery had already wilted into something heavy and sour. My canvases leaned against the wall like silent witnesses, reminding me of the hope I had dared to feel just hours earlier. For the first time in weeks, I wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe art would never be more than a dream that left me empty-handed. I heard the soft creak of the floorboards outside my door. I thought it was Nathan, maybe coming to check in. But then came a gentle knock. Elena? The voice was lower, steadier. My father's. He never knocked on my door this late. Yeah? I whispered, not trusting my voice to sound strong. The door opened slowly, and Dad stepped inside, closing it behind him with quiet care. He wasn't wearing his usual work clothes, just an old sweater, and his face looked tired in the lamplight. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me, then at the painting stacked against the wall. Finally, he sat down on the edge of my bed. Your mom's words, they can be sharp, he said softly, but I want you to know something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. My heart skipped. He held it out to me, his expression calm but serious. I hesitated before taking it. Inside was a check, neatly folded, the amount written out in his careful handwriting. It was more money than I'd ever seen in one place, enough for tuition at the art program I had been secretly looking at. My throat tightened. Dad, what is this? I managed to ask. It's for your classes, he said simply. For supplies, for whatever you need to keep going. His eyes softened, and his voice lowered as though he were afraid someone might overhear. Elena, you deserve the chance to chase this. To chase what makes you alive. Izamati's mid-market. The weight of his words pressed against me harder than the envelope in my hands. All my life I had convinced myself no one in this house really believed in me. Yet here he was, sitting on my bed, telling me I was worth it. My vision blurred, and I blinked fast, not wanting him to see the tears rising. Dad, do you really think I can do this? My voice cracked in a way that embarrassed me. But I couldn't help it. He didn't hesitate. I do. I've watched you. Elena, you don't give up. That matters more than trophies or titles. It matters more than what anyone else says. Sneered, every watt. I pressed the envelope to my chest like it was a lifeline. For once, the fire inside me wasn't just anger or defiance. It was something steadier. Something that felt like hope. I wanted to throw my arms around him, but instead, I just whispered, "Thank you. Whenever must capper." He patted my hand gently, then stood. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll keep painting. Whenever must capper." As he left the room, I sat there in the quiet, clutching the envelope. It wasn't just money he had given me. It was belief. The kind I had been starving for. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't as alone in this house as I thought. A few nights later, long after the house had gone quiet, I was lying awake with my sketchbook open on my lap. My pencil hovered over the page, but no lines would come. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the furnace and the occasional groan of the old wood settling. That was when I heard it, a sound I didn't recognize at first. Soft, stifled, like air catching in someone's throat. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from Nathan's room. I froze. Nathan was the strong one, the unshakable one. He didn't break down. He didn't falter. But the sound came again, an unmistakable sob, raw and muffled through the wall. My chest tightened, and before I could second-guess myself, I slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway. I tapped lightly on his door. "Nathan?" No answer. Only a shuffle inside. I pushed the door open just a crack. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, his shoulders hunched, his face buried in his hands. His tie was still hanging loose around his neck from the day before, like he hadn't even bothered to change. For a moment, I just stood there, unsure if I should leave him alone. But then he looked up. His eyes were red, his face blotched in a way I had never seen. He looked like a stranger, stripped of all the polish and confidence he wore so easily. "Are you okay?" My voice sounded small, almost childish. He gave a bitter laugh. "Do I look okay?" Then his expression softened, as though the act of snapping had drained what little strength he had left. He gestured weakly for me to come in. I sat down beside him, careful, like one wrong move might make him shatter completely. He rubbed his temples before finally speaking. "I can't do it anymore. Elena, I can't keep being who they want me to be." His words spilled out in a rush, like they had been bottled up for years. I blinked at him, as stunned. This was Nathan, the golden boy, the one who always had the right answer, the one Mom paraded like proof that our family was flawless. Hearing him admit weakness felt almost impossible. They think I'm fine because I smile and say yes. But every day, it feels like I can't breathe, he whispered. The expectations, the pressure, it's like I'm drowning and no one even notices. His voice cracked on the last word, and he pressed his palms against his eyes. I ashamed of the tears that kept coming. I didn't know what to say. My whole life I had looked at him with resentment, convinced he had it all. But sitting there beside him, I realized he was just as trapped as I was, only in a different kind of cage. Something shifted in me then. The anger I carried toward him softened into something else: recognition. Maybe even compassion. He wasn't my rival in this house. He was another casualty of the same impossible standards. I reached out, laying a hand on his back. "Nathan, I had no idea. In Sneered every Persepold to tell you." He let out a shaky breath, like my words gave him permission to finally fall apart. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I didn't see him as the perfect son. I saw him as my brother, flawed, hurting, and human. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The house was still, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Nathan leaned back against the headboard, his hands clasped in front of him, as if he was holding himself together. I stayed next to him, not pressing, just waiting. Finally, he let out a breath that sounded more like surrender than relief. "You know what's crazy?" he said softly. "I've always been jealous of you. It is affording my pictures affording from the Vim." The words nearly knocked me over. I stared at him. I'm certain I'd misheard. "Jealous? Of me?" He gave a humorless chuckle. "Yeah. You've always had this freedom. You sketch. You dream. You make things with your hands. You don't care if anyone approves. I've envied that my whole life. That made her fur." I shook my head in disbelief. "Nathan, you're the one they praise. The one with the grades. The career path. The spotlight. I've spent years feeling invisible in the shadow you cast. That made her fur?" His eyes flicked toward me then, heavy with guilt. "I didn't realize it was like that for you. I thought you liked being in your own world. I thought maybe you didn't need their approval the way I did." "Hate it, Minna's mate." I laughed. But it was brittle, almost sharp. Of course I needed it. I'm their daughter too. But no matter what, I brought home a drawing, a scholarship, anything. It was never enough. It was always, "Look at Nathan. Look at what your brother's doing. Do you know what that feels like?" His jaw tightened, and he looked down at his hands. "I do now. Because every time they point at me as some shining example, I feel like a fraud, like I'm standing on a stage wearing a mask that's slipping." Acoles. The confession hung between us, raw and fragile. For the first time in years, I felt like we were standing on the same side of the glass instead of peering at each other through it. You know what's funny? I whispered. We've both been hurting. All this time. And we never said a word. We just carried it alone. Ackles. Nathan gave a short laugh. But his eyes were wet. That's what this house does to you. It makes you think you're alone. Even when someone's sitting right next to you. There's made it next. I am all was it for fix. We looked at each other, then really looked. The tension that had built over years of quiet resentment began to unravel. My anger softened into something like relief. And I saw his guarded pride ease into vulnerability. Maybe, I said slowly. We don't have to play their game anymore. Maybe we can just be us. There's made it next. I am all was it for fix. His lips curled into the faintest smile. You mean, you with your paints and me with whatever's left of me? I nudged his shoulder. Exactly. Imperfect. Human. Is it mean that comes endowed? For the first time in what felt like forever, we both laughed, not bitter, not forced, but real. Tears clung to my lashes, and I saw them glisten in his eyes too. It wasn't the sound of victory, but of release. In that late-night room, surrounded by silence and shadows, something shifted. We weren't competitors anymore. We weren't symbols of our parents' pride or disappointment. We were simply brother and sister, sharing the weight we'd both been carrying for far too long. And for the first time in years, I felt like we might actually find our way back to each other. The night of my mother's birthday arrived like a storm I had seen building for weeks. Our house was transformed into a palace of crystal chandeliers, polished silver, and soft piano music drifting through the air. Waiters in black and white uniforms floated by with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Guests whispered in clusters, dressed in gowns and tailored suits, each of them part of the glittering world my mother adored. I had always hated these events. I hated the shallow laughter, the endless talk of investments, vacations, and who had outdone whom. But that night, I wasn't just another silent figure at the edge of the crowd. I was stepping into that room with something that was mine and mine alone. Upstairs, in front of the mirror, I took one last look at my dress. It wasn't just fabric. It was a story. I had sewn pieces of my own artwork into the folds, patches of painted silk, embroidered lines, patterns that carried fragments of my life. One section showed the small girl I used to be, sitting alone at a table while others celebrated without her. Another carried colors of storms and shadows, the kind of darkness I used to feel pressing down on me. But the lower hem exploded into color, bright strokes of yellow, blue, and red, an eruption of the freedom I had fought so hard to claim. My hands trembled as I slipped on my heels. My father had told me I deserved to follow my passion. But now it was time to test whether I truly believed it. Could I walk into that ballroom and wear my wounds as art? Not shame? When I descended the staircase, the chatter dimmed. Heads turned. At first, there was confusion. Guests blinked at the sight of me, unsure what they were seeing. The dress was nothing like the sleek, expensive gowns they wore. It was bold, raw, unapologetic. Then, slowly, a murmur began to ripple through the room. I heard someone whisper, "Is that her own work?" Another voice said, "I've never seen anything like it. Thank you for watching." I kept walking, each step echoing louder than the music. My mother, standing near the grand piano with a glass of champagne, froze when she saw me. Her perfectly painted smile faltered. For once, she had no script ready. I felt the heat of the spotlight without a single bulb shining on me. Every eye in that room traced the stories, etched into my dress: the lonely child, the heavy shadows, the burst of rebellion. They weren't just looking at fabric, they were looking at my life, laid bare in colors and threads. And in that moment, my heart pounded with something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the shallow pride of approval, but the deep, trembling pride of finally showing the world who I was. I caught sight of Nathan across the room. He wasn't laughing or whispering like the others. His eyes were locked on me. And he gave the smallest nod. It was all I needed, a silent reminder. I wasn't alone anymore. I reached the center of the room, where the birthday cake gleamed under soft light. I stood there, letting the silence swell. The guests weren't whispering anymore. They were staring, some with awe, some with confusion, some with the kind of discomfort that comes when the truth stands too close. For once, I didn't shrink under their gaze. I lifted my chin, breathed in, and allowed myself to be seen. This was my declaration. Stitched together piece by piece. I was no longer the forgotten daughter hiding in the shadows. I was Elena. And this was my voice. The silence in the room grew unbearable. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the clink of a glass set too quickly on a table. My mother's eyes, sharp and blazing, locked onto mine. Her voice cut through the stillness like glass shattering. What on earth do you think you're doing? Elena, are you trying to humiliate me? To make a spectacle of yourself in front of my guests? I felt the blood rush to my face. But I didn't flinch. For years I had swallowed her words, taken them into my bones like poison. Not tonight. No, I said, my voice steady, even as my hands trembled at my sides. I'm showing you the daughter you never wanted to see. The lows airing mains tell ticks, person herver fall, and the lodge in before sing. Gasps rippled through the room. Some guests turned away. Others stared openly, caught between fascination and discomfort. My mother blinked, as if she hadn't expected me to answer back. This, she hissed, gesturing at my dress. This is not art. It's a mockery. A stunt. You've made yourself look foolish. I was a cumster. I almost laughed at the irony. For so long, she had dictated what was worthy, what was beautiful, what was acceptable. Tonight, I had torn through that script. Before I could speak again, a deep voice broke in. My father? He had been silent most of the evening, as he often was when my mother commanded the stage. But now, he rose slowly from his chair. His presence alone seemed to shift the air. Enough, he said, his voice firm, louder than I had ever heard it. You've dismissed her for years. You've dismissed both of them. You've ignored your children's pain for too long. The room froze. My mother's face turned pale, then flushed with fury. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Nathan stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. For once, he didn't wear the mask of perfection. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. She's right, he said. We've both been suffocating in this house. You made me into your golden sun, but you never saw what it did to me. And Elena? You pushed her into the shadows so I could shine. It broke her. It broke us both. Whenever has befall in the better any night. Hearing him say it aloud nearly brought me to my knees. For years I thought I was the only one who felt invisible, the only one who carried this weight. Now his words carved a path of truth through the room. My mother shook her head as if the world had tilted beneath her feet. Nathan, not you too. In mines. Yes, he said simply. Me too. In mines. A heavy silence fell. No one dared move. No one dared speak. The chandeliers glittered above us. But the air was thick with everything that had gone unsaid for decades. Guests shifted uncomfortably, caught in the storm of a family cracking open in front of them. My chest rose and fell as if I'd run miles. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving her disapproval, I was standing in it. Unbroken. In that silence, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph. Not victory. But freedom. The house felt strangely quiet after the last guest had gone. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the polite chatter, all of it had vanished, leaving behind only the echo of what had just happened. I stood near the window, still in my dress, my skin prickling with the remnants of adrenaline. Nathan lingered by the doorway, watching our parents with an expression I couldn't quite read. My mother sat perfectly still in her chair, hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of composure. But the silence around her was different than usual. It wasn't the cold, commanding silence I'd grown up with. It was heavy, unsettled, almost fragile. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, in a voice so low I almost missed it, she whispered, "Maybe I've been wrong. It is not my trying." The words hung in the air like a crack in the armor she'd worn all her life. My father looked at her with something between relief and sorrow. Nathan's shoulders eased. And for the first time in years, I felt we were all standing in the same room. Not just as roles in her play, but as people. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a start. Later that night, when the house had settled into uneasy silence, I slipped out of the dress and hung it carefully in my studio. I stood there barefoot, the floor cool beneath me, surrounded by canvases that told the story I could never put into words. Moonlight streamed through the high windows, brushing the room in silver. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide here. The studio wasn't just an escape anymore, it was mine, my sanctuary, my voice. I pulled a fresh canvas onto the easel and dipped my brush into a jar of paint. The first stroke came easily, almost joyfully. I wasn't painting for approval, or recognition, or even for rebellion. I was painting because I wanted to. Each color spilled onto the canvas like a part of myself I had finally reclaimed. I caught my reflection in the glass. And to my surprise, I was smiling. Not the careful smile I used to wear at family dinners. Not the polite one I offered to strangers. This smile was unguarded. I felt the weight lift from my chest, little by little. As if I had been carrying a burden I hadn't realized I could set down. I thought back to all the years I begged silently, desperately for my mother's approval. Every drawing I had hidden. Every idea I had buried. Every part of me I had tried to shrink, just to fit into her narrow vision of who I should be. That chapter was over. The moment I stopped begging for approval, I finally found my voice.